You guys, today I am doing a follow-up on a story that I covered not too long ago. The story of Joanne Aide, who was viciously attacked by a student, Brandon Depa, at Matanzas High School in Florida back in February. If I mispronounce names and places incorrectly, I do apologize. Now, this absolute savage beating was over a Nintendo Switch. I would even argue to say that this was attempted murder. I will go ahead and play that video for you guys right now. Now, I do apologize. I obviously have to edit the video pretty heavily or YouTube will come after me pretty hard on it. That being said, I will leave the link to what we are talking about today in the description down below. So if you wanted to see a little bit more of it not being edited, you are welcome to do so. But anyways, in this video, you can see Brandon Depa beating this teacher without any mercy. I would even argue to say if there was no one there to stop it, the teacher would have died. He wouldn't have stopped. He would have beaten her into a complete pulp. And keep in mind, this is a 6'6" absolute giant of a human being. I think it's safe to assume that this young man probably packed a lot of power. But anyways, let's jump into this follow-up story and see where we're at. Tearful mother of Brandon Depa, the hulking 6'6" autistic boy who brutally beat teacher's aide unconscious over Nintendo Switch, says prison is a death sentence as she breaks her silence and pleads with victim to show mercy. Leanne Depa spoke out for the first time since Brandon Depa, then 17, violently attacked teacher's aide Joanne Aide at Matanzas High School in February. Brandon was seen punching and kicking the educator in the back of the head. He pled no contest as an adult for first-degree aggravated battery. She apologized to Aide for the attack, but pleaded for her to show mercy after the victim called on the teenager to be locked up for the maximum of 30 years. 30 years is an extremely long time, but I have a very strong opinion that I'm going to build up in this video, basically coming to the conclusion that Brandon probably should not be associated with everyday people. Before that, I want to hop into this video with Brandon's mother so we can get her reaction to the entirety of the situation. So let's go ahead and hop in here and let's check this out.
Leanne Depa is kind enough to join me now for her first national interview. Leanne, thanks so much for being on with me. As a mom, I'm just sort of curious how you're processing all of what's happened.
It's devastating that my heart is breaking. I'm terrified for my child.
I do want to say I do empathize with this woman. I mean, if you put yourself in a parent's position, obviously you're going to be looking at the situation with a very biased view. This is your child, adopted, not adopted, doesn't matter. If you raise a child, you're obviously going to have a deep connection with the child regardless.
You know, I feel like if he gets sentenced to prison, it's a death sentence for him. He's scared. And to have your child call and cry and say, I don't want to die, it's awful.
So can I ask, was his autism, was that ever brought in the
I gotta say, I'm a little confused on why he would die here, but we'll keep going on.
litigation of his case and in the plea deal, especially as pertains to the sentencing, because 30 years in adult prison is a very long time, especially for a 17-year-old kid.
Okay, he's not 17 anymore, he's 18. And that's basically why he was being charged as an adult to begin with, is that he's not a child. But also 30 years for attempting to kill somebody seems pretty damn accurate to me.
He was direct filed. Originally, he was charged as a juvenile, and 2 days later, he was direct filed. And no, that was not considered. In Florida, my understanding is that a charge of autism, autism is not a defense.
I don't think autism could ever be a defense. And the reason being, we're talking about a spectrum of things that can be going on here. I know I'm going to get a bit of hate from the autism community, but the issue being autism is on such a grand spectrum that how could you possibly bring that into defense? I don't see how that would be possible, and it'd have to be based on every single case individually, which will never set a precedent, so no cases can be used in other cases really, and that would be the ultimate problem using autism as a defense. Also, a lot of you who know about autism know that autism doesn't make you a crazy person by default. There are plenty of very functioning autistic people in the world, and I would hate to bundle them into situations like this and give everyone a view of autistic people as being aggressors, you know, savages.
And that it can't even be considered until the sentencing phase.
There are a few things
So
I
it can
think
be
that,
considered.
you know, the audience should know about your son. Autism isn't the only disability disability that he's living with. There's a host of special needs that your son was coping with, and that the school
There's a
was supposed
host?
to be accommodating for. Let me just go over some of it. There's, of course, the severe
Please.
autism, and then there's ADHD, attention deficit hyperactivity disorder, something called oppositional defiance disorder, which is, as it sounds, it makes a child extremely defiant and oppositional to any, I mean, even getting breakfast can be a battle.
Yeah, what else?
Reactive explosive disorder, that's another condition that your son is coping with. With all of that,
Okay, first off, I'm not a psychologist, psychiatrist, or anything like that, but one thing I hate about this profession, the one thing I hate about this whole science is that there is a lot of labeling. And while a lot of it is very real, very justifiable, there's also an equal amount of it that is pretty nonsensical. It's really strange to me because if you really think about it, there is a mental condition for literally everything. And throwing ADD and ADHD into it as well is not really helping anything here, in my opinion. But I think one of the biggest issues I have with a lot of these diagnoses is that they're so subjective, is that they're filled with so many different kinds of exceptions. And that in itself is a pretty damn big problem. When you can pass a certain type of test and yet fail that same test a day later, anybody who works in the mental health field will tell you that there are so many different types of situations that do not make sense. Anybody who deals with mental illnesses like psychologists or psychiatrists, they will tell you that there is no cookie cutter format to figuring these things out. There are so many exceptions to this practice of medicine. If you've ever taken any of these like psychiatric kind of evaluations, there are a lot of open-ended questions they give you because there are a lot of paths to get to a diagnosis. Mental health disorders have the highest of misdiagnosis. I'm sorry, if 92.7% of diagnosis of bipolar disorder is a thing, it's really hard to take a diagnosis such as that as a real thing. But I digress. Let's hop back into the video.
that list, why did the school even allow a Nintendo Switch to be part of any aspect of his day?
That's a good question.
That's something I ask every day, and I don't understand why.
That's a question you ask every day. You're supposed to be this boy's mother. Yeah, I don't know why he would have the Nintendo Switch.
In his IEP, it was stated that in the intensive behavior group home that he was living in, if they ever had to remove it as a consequence, they called in the crisis team. And the original IEP, so he could, to motivate him to do his work, he could earn tokens to then go to like a snack closet.
So an IEP is an individualized educational plan, in case for you guys that didn't know. I don't know how a Nintendo Switch could possibly end up in an IEP, but yeah.
This year, he had a new teacher who, it's not Joan. Joan was not his teacher. She's the para. He had a new teacher who, it was her first year teaching, and I don't know if she didn't understand the IEP,
Okay, if a Nintendo Switch is in the IEP, there's nothing to understand because it should not be in an IEP.
didn't read it, but she approached the group home and asked the group home to send it in.
I love the victim blaming here as well. She didn't read the IEP that included a Nintendo Switch. Get out of here.
Listen, for anybody who watches that video, it's hard for them to get past it, and I can understand they'd be devastated for Joan Aide, the victim in this attack, and I can imagine you feel devastated for her as well.
And I do believe that she feels devastated. I absolutely do believe that. I don't think this woman has any sort of like ill thoughts about the teacher.
You wouldn't have wanted this to happen. You're obviously torn between the suffering that she's going through, and then of course the son that you love. It's just odd that
Look
he
at those
was
markings.
in, this kind of public schooling to begin with. Do you know why this was the situation? Why
That is a really good question. Why was he in a traditional school?
he was actually even in a typical school like this, if he had this list of conditions he was coping with?
When he originally was in an autism behavioral hospital back before COVID hit, right before COVID hit. And we went through a process to where we were not able to reunify with him and bring him back home because of the limitations of seeing him in that year.
I think she needs to go into a little bit more detail on why there was limitations in seeing him that year due to COVID.
Due to COVID. And so he was placed in an intensive behavioral group home, and I questioned it at the beginning. I had always homeschooled him because he didn't handle the school environment. I asked the group home, did he have to go to public school? Could he not do school online? And I was assured by them that all of their clients went to public school.
She was assured by them that all their clients went to a public school. You know this boy better than anyone else in this situation. You just said moments ago that you had him in a homeschool because you thought it was smarter, you thought it was safer. Now all of a sudden you're going to just agree with this recommendation? Doesn't make a whole lot of sense.
So even though he was a level 6 and
I don't know what a
never
level
thought he
6 means.
belonged in public school, I didn't have a choice.
Leanne, can I just ask you, I know you haven't had a chance to speak with Joan Niditch, the victim, the paraprofessional who was attacked by your son, but is there something you would want to say to her if you have a chance to say it tonight?
Good question, yeah.
Just that I am so sorry for what my son did. Nobody should ever have to go through that.
I do believe her.
But at the same time, please consider that my son has had a hard life and he's gone through so much trauma in his life. He has autism. Please show mercy to him.
It's easy to look at this from the outside in and be like, yeah, you know, I'm sure he didn't mean to do this. But there are a lot of people who don't mean to do a lot of things that end up in prison. I mean, take a drunk driver, for instance. I'm sure when they get behind a wheel, they don't intend to kill people, but it happens all the time. And that is the end of that interview. My ultimate takeaway from this is that what she had said was very expected. It's what a mother would say and do. I do believe she's being empathetic. I do believe that she's being as heartfelt as she can. And I also believe that she'll do anything she can to protect her son from ending up in prison for the next 30 years. But we cannot forget the real victim, Joanne Niditch. She has suffered through 5 broken ribs, a concussion, hearing loss in one of her ears, and also other cognitive issues, stating, unfortunately, a lot of my injuries that are not visible, I'm going to have for the rest of my life. And apparently she is struggling to get her workers' compensation resolved. And without any surprise, she wants him to serve the entirety of the sentence. His lawyer, Kurt Tiefke, definitely pronounced that wrong, sought to have him declared incompetent to stand trial because he is autistic. A court-appointed psychologist found Brennan was in fact competent to stand trial, and Circuit Judge Terrence Perkins will decide his fate early next year, which his sentencing hearing looks to be scheduled January 31st. Now, this is not an outlier thing for Brendan. He has a history of getting into fights. He has 3 prior battery arrests before this incident even happened, and he was also in a prison fight just in September. My final thoughts, you guys, is very simple. He not only needs to serve the time for the crime he had committed, he also needs to never be amongst everyday people again. Let's assume that these diagnoses are very real. In what world would it be acceptable for a person to be walking around that is at any moment just ready to explode on you? Who would take issue if you just asked him to come and eat breakfast? I don't know about you guys, but I would like to know that the people that I'm engaging with in my everyday life isn't going to explode on me and kill me because they heard something that they didn't like, especially if this person has a diagnosis for it. If he's been evaluated and they know that this is a possibility, who in their right mind would allow people like Brendan to just be amongst everybody else? If you know for a fact that in any moment he can explode, he should not be able to just walk the streets. We cannot just give a pass to this, you guys. At what point do we actually punish him? Do we wait for him to actually kill somebody? Again, he not only has a history of beating people in the past before this even happened, he also has many diagnoses and is clearly very aggressive. I don't know, you guys. Maybe I should be labeled a monster and we should just let this guy just wander the streets. But I absolutely want to know what you guys are thinking in the comments down below. And as always, do not forget to hit the like or the dislike button, subscribe to the channel, hit the notification bell so you hopefully get notified every time I post a new video. And I will see you guys in the next one. Peace.